In the previous video, we saw what happened in phase 1 of the water pumping process that occurred in the subterranean cuttings at the Giza Plateau. But there is much more to the pumping process. Simply put, the purpose of phase 1 was to compress air in the upper portion of the subterranean chamber. This air is compressed by two forces. These forces are gravity combined with the force of implosion. The combination of both of these forces compresses the air to a much higher pressure than simply using the force of gravity alone. At the end of phase 1, the water had stopped flowing down the descending passage because the air in the subterranean chamber was compressed to the maximum pressure that this water pumping system could achieve. When this goal was achieved, water movement stopped and the water valve in the upper end of the descending passage moved to the closed position. Also, water in the subterranean chamber stopped moving in a vortex. The check valve in the grotto is still in the closed position. In phase 2, the compressed air pushed water out of the subterranean chamber. As soon as phase 1 ended, phase 2 started. At the beginning of phase 2, the highly compressed air forces water out of the subterranean chamber. The water cannot move up the descending passage because the check valve in this passage is closed. There is nowhere for the water to go but up through the passage leading to the grotto. As soon as this starts to happen, the check valve in the grotto opens and water moves through the open check valve in the grotto and continues up the passage excavated in the mound. This is where water exited the construction pump. Water entered the construction pump at the upper end of the descending passage and exited the construction pump out of the passage cut in the mound of bedrock. In phase 2, the compressed air pushed water out of the subterranean chamber. This water traveled up towards the grotto. Water was pushed into the grotto, opening the check valve. With the check valve open, water continued up through the grotto and into the mound. The water moved up through the mound and exited the pump. The water exited out of the mound and kept the construction pond full during construction. This pump also supplied water for the water locks. The output of the construction pump is through the passage in the mound the Great Pyramid was built over. Phase 2 uses the energy stored in the compressed air to push a gush of water up through the grotto and out of the construction pump. The output of the construction pump is not steady, but is a rhythmic pulsation originating deep below the Great Pyramid. This fascinating and powerful pump brings a pulsation of water up and out of the mound on the Giza Plateau. The subterranean water pump is like a beating heart, bringing the necessary fluid up to where it is needed to supply water to the water locks. This construction pump brings to life the construction process used to assemble this ancient wonder of the world. Water exited the construction pump in a pulsating manner. The water from the construction pump kept the construction pond full and supplied water to the water locks during construction. Barges moved from the Nile through the water locks and up onto the construction pond. Phase 2 is essentially the movement of water up through the opened valve in the grotto and out of the mound. But there is much more to the water pumping process. After the gush of water exits the construction pump, phase 3 begins. At the end of phase 2, the check valve in the grotto is open, and the check valve in the upper end of the descending passage remains closed. The air pressure in the subterranean chamber is much lower at the end of phase 2. After the pulsation of water leaves the water pump at the end of phase 2, water begins to move back down through the grotto. This is because the compressed air has used up all of its stored energy in phase 2 of the pumping process. When the water begins to move back down through the grotto, the check valve in the grotto immediately closes. But the flapper in the grotto's check valve has a hole in it. The purpose of this hole is to inhibit the flow of water moving down through the check valve. Also, when water begins to move down through the closed check valve, a whirlpool is formed. This whirlpool starts at the mound and goes all the way down to the subterranean chamber. The hole in the flapper inhibits the flow of water back down this passage, but allows for the creation of a whirlpool to form in this chamber, similar to water moving down the kitchen sink. In phase 3, water started moving back towards the grotto, closing the flapper with a hole in it. The design of this passage caused the water to move in a whirlpool, pumping air all the way down to the subterranean chamber. The whirlpool moved air down through the hole in the closed valve. The whirlpool continued to move air all the way down to the subterranean chamber. The geniuses who built the construction pump utilized the powerful force of water moving in a vortex to pump air back down into the subterranean chamber. Air is soluble in water. If the air in the subterranean chamber becomes absorbed into the water, then the subterranean chamber would become waterlogged and the subterranean chamber would cease to function. With all of the water turbulence that occurs in the subterranean chamber, there needed to be a method to replenish the air deep below the surface of the Giza Plateau. The builders, who were geniuses, devised this method to ensure that there would be a proper supply of air provided to the subterranean chamber to keep this chamber from becoming waterlogged. The whirlpool in the mound traveled through the closed valve in the grotto, serves the purpose of pumping air into the subterranean chamber. Water's property of implosion that Victor Schauberger researched was used by the builders deep in the bedrock to pump water. In review, phase 1 compressed air in the subterranean chamber. Phase 2 used compressed air to push water up and out of the pump. Phase 3 replenished the air in the subterranean chamber. Oh, how I wish I could have been there when the subterranean construction pump was operating. With the powerful forces involved, the ground would tremble as water would be expelled out of the mound in rhythmic pulses of fresh, clean water. Like a beating heart, the subterranean cuttings, functioning as a machine, would supply pumped water to be the lifeblood of the construction process. This water was used to keep the construction pond full, as described in our previous video series. Also, this pumped water was used to supply the necessary water for the waterlocks during construction, allowing for the stones on barges to be moved and lifted effortlessly to the necessary heights and to their final location. The description of the operation of the construction pump provided in these few videos was presented in a manner as simple and as basic as possible. This material is new to most, and presenting this material as simply as possible allows the viewer to become familiar with the concepts involved. This series of videos are just a primer and introduction to the understanding of the subterranean cuttings below the Great Pyramid being a functional machine and infrastructure which pumped water. There is so much more information about the subterranean cuttings and how they function to pump water than can be provided in these basic introductory videos. My second book, called The Great Pyramid Prosperity Machine, gives much more detailed information about the subterranean water pump than could possibly be provided in a few short videos. Deep below the surface of the Giza Plateau, ancient builders created a massive water pump. Even though it is unrecognized by most, it is still a water pump. This water pump's first purpose was for the construction of the Great Pyramid. The original builders used pumped water, water locks, and barges to build the Great Pyramid. But what was the Great Pyramid itself for? Was it a water pump too? Why build a pyramid structure to be a water pump when you already have a water pump built into the subterranean cuttings? If it was a water pump, what powered it? Our first video series explained how the Great Pyramid was assembled. In the following videos of this series, we will explore the design and function of the passages and chambers in the interior of the Great Pyramid and offer an explanation for the complex interior design of the Great Pyramid water pump. I hope you watch the remainder of the videos in this series to become familiar with our explanation of the enigmatic structure known as the Great Pyramid.